Hi, Jess.
Hello, how are you?
I am doing so well. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to see your face.
Really good to see your beautiful self as well.
Truly, truly.
So, of course, we have been friends for a long time, very long
Yeah,
time, go way back.
yep, all
Um,
the way.
literally all the way. But I'd love you to just tell whoever might be watching this a little bit about yourself.
All right. Yeah, Jess. I based in Cody. We grew up there, obviously, and I currently live in Portland, Oregon. I work in software design, so it's UX design for those that are savvy in the tech world. But related to us, I'm a feminist. I do tarot readings, and I think I identify as like a witch slash pagan. So I do a lot of the rituals and things that are associated with the seasons and cycles and all of that, just to be in connection with the earth. So yeah, I think that's a good overview.
Yes, that's a beautiful overview. So, can you tell us a little bit about sort of that process of awakening more towards being interested in like witchy, seasonal, cyclical sort of magic?
Yeah, totally. So I've always been atheist. I think there was a time when I was a kid where I just had this like moment of like religion in its normal form just did not speak to me, didn't make sense to me, but I never had anything that was spiritual. And so as an adult, I came to this point of looking into Celtic history because that was my background, and I wanted to just have more depth to my understanding about my heritage. And I also read this book, Waking the Witch, which is excellent. I would highly recommend. And it just like all clicked for me of like, there is a spirituality to Celtic heritage where it comes from my roots, but it's also something that's practiced a lot today. And it was so much of just what is natural. It's about celebrating spring coming back. It's celebrating the dying of the earth. So it wasn't necessarily something where there was, a presence necessarily, but I believe in like just worshiping earth as the goddess and the different phases that she goes through, and the moon. It just all seems like so much of our lives are cyclical, and this was a perfect fit of those types of things and just honoring the different phases of our lives too.
Right. And I mean, obviously, there's so much, the more we get into more of these sort of traditional practices, the more we see that they correspond with like a lot of the holidays and major events
Yes.
that happen in Christianity.
Oh, I love to like not like put it in people's faces, but it's just like, did you know this thing, or like Easter or Halloween or whatever it might be.
Or the winter solstice, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Everything. So, where and when did tarot start to fit into this? And also, can you tell us? I mean, I've gotten so much more into tarot like since we last connected, and
Yeah.
it is definitely like a language and a framework. And a lot of people watching this might have no idea what it is, like the way that I basically had no idea what it was like 6 months
Mhm.
ago. So I'd love to hear what your kind of overview and how that fit in with your connection with Earth and the seasons and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I've actually read a few books that had tarot included in them, and they were just fictional. And I think tarot shows up in pop culture and all these types of things so often. Like I even went to bars and they would have tarot cards as like the drink orders, but it's like you just don't have any concept of what it actually is. So then when I was here in Portland, I found this deck, and it was just like random. I wasn't looking for a deck by any means, but it was this the Wild Unknown deck, and it was based on animals. So it was all so natural, which is something that I speak to. So I found this Oracle deck, and then it was like, oh, I didn't even know there was a difference between Oracle decks and tarot decks. And then I finally got the tarot deck, and when I started doing all the research on it, it's like, well, again, this is all so cyclical. It is your journey from each suit to the major arcana, from the major minor arcana, all of the journeys throughout your life and the dying and rebirth and all these things are represented in the cards, and the archetypes themselves are representations of the stories that we hear throughout our lives. So it was just, again, it just kind of like fit right into what my thoughts were at the time. And then when I started really getting into it, the reading of tarot cards was this, okay, I'm listening to my soul, I'm listening to my gut in a way that I can't do in my, without being mindful throughout my day. It's just something where that inner soul is speaking to you and telling you what you need to hear. And I think that's really hard for us to do if we don't sit down and take the time to just pay attention to what might be going on in our lives outside of the day to day.
Right. So you feel like it's a way to, especially being someone who, I mean, I feel like I can say about you is highly intelligent, like pretty cerebral. You have this, tech job. It is based on user experience, but like you're using the intellect a lot. And this is kind of a way to like get in touch with your intuition. Oh, you're frozen. Hello? Okay, so as we were saying before we lost connection, so tarot is kind of a way to access more of your intuitive side versus like your intellectual side.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think everyone struggles with that, of just getting, lost in your head, lost in all the daily crap that's going on. And it's a way for you to come back to like, okay, here's what's important that I need to be working on, whether or not it's, about myself or, how I want to create my life. It's always that reminder for me.
Right. And I mean, for me, with a lot of the stuff I've been thinking about and in my practice with tarot, it's also sometimes kind of like, okay, well, like consciously, we can always tell ourselves, like, these are the things I need to be focusing on and working on. And in a way, tarot is sort of a form through which we can access the unconscious as far as like, actually, this.
Exactly. It's like, oh, you think that this is the issue in your head, but really, like, you've got all this other shit that's more important, or, is really the underlying cause of what's going on in your life. And you wouldn't have even considered that if you hadn't been able to self reflect more.
Right. So, can you tell us a bit about each of the suits and what they represent?
Yeah. So cups is emotions. So I guess minor arcana, you have the four suits and then you have the major arcana. So cups is about emotions. It's about your emotional state and the journey that you go through from there. In every state, everyone starts with ace of cups up through like the king, as you would in a normal deck. Then we have swords. Swords is about taking action. It's more of that fiery energy. And I should note that each suit has an element associated with it. So cups is water, swords is fire. Then you have pentacles. Pentacles is more of earthly things. So it could be your job, it could be money, it could be property. And as the earth card, it's like the grounding elements. And then the last one is wands, and wands is air. And air is, and it's about your mental state. So it's more about intuition and cerebral things that is going on in your mind versus things that are emotional.
Right.
And then major arcana, those are all very specific things. So you start with the Fool and you go all the way through to the World. And that's like this major journey of your transformation. And it's kind of like, if you look at like nirvana, it's this whole being of you becoming this whole self. And so each of those throughout that very long journey is what gets you to the world.
Right. And something that I've been told as far as, when you're doing spreads and like major arcana versus minor arcana come up is that actually Layla told me this. We both know
Oh,
Layla,
really? Nice.
of course.
Yes. Yes.
That when you see major arcana come up, that's kind of an indication that like this is soul work. Like this is one of those
Yes.
big themes of you going through, you know, this phase of your soul's journey. And it's kind of in a way things that are like more, I don't know, predestined or karma, however you want to put it,
Mhm.
versus like minor arcana is more so everyday things and like things that you have more control over when it comes to influencing that situation.
Exactly. Yep. It's like if you got a minor arcana card, like then you have some control over it, like you said, versus major arcana is like the major archetypes of transformation of how you should move forward with your life.
So, and then you mentioned this as well before, and I feel like which this is really cool and speaks to sort of that there's a reawakening around the stuff going on. I feel like there are so many different like oracle decks and affirmation
Hmm.
decks and all these things that people are making. A lot of them, at least in my observation of it, women, which I think is awesome.
Hmm. Yes.
But what's the difference between like an oracle deck and a tarot deck?
Yeah. So the tarot deck is the traditional deck. You can look up the history, but it's something that has been created with the same elements for hundreds of years in one shape or another. Versus oracle decks are completely creative expressions.
Yeah.
You can create an oracle deck out of any type of symbolism that you'd like, and it's all of the energies that you want to build with it. So I mean, there's some gorgeous decks out there in every way, shape, or form. The one that I have is it's element based, and then it has different animals associated with each element. But yeah, it's something that can be as big or as small or as many cards as the artist chooses to use.
Right. And how do you like in your own practice when you're going to these, like what do
Mhm.
you choose to use tarot for versus oracle decks and kind of how do you use them?
Yeah, so I use an oracle deck each day as like a daily card pull because so often I struggle with using tarot as a daily deck because there's some things where like if you get the a big major arcana card, I'm not necessarily thinking, okay, today is the day that is like a major day. So it's like for easier for me to say, okay, as like what's general energies that I should be paying attention to today. So like for example, today I pulled the Raven card, which was very applicable because it was about spirituality and mindfulness and you tapping into your intuition. So
Yeah.
all of like the things we're talking about. And then I use my tarot deck with the moon phases for the most part. So for each moon phase, I do a different card pull, which means about once a week. And that way it's like a check-in of like, what am I setting my intentions for with the new moon versus at the full moon? What am I embracing versus the wait or waning moon? What am I letting go? So it's like a good way for me to practice every week with something that's a larger spread.
And so tell us a little bit about what your learning and experience has been with what the different moon phases symbolize or are
Mhm.
kind of like ripe for.
Yeah, yeah. So I love this because I think everyone enjoys the fresh start of starting something new or, you know, giving yourself the opportunity to reset even. So for me, it's always that, you know, you can go into like the calendar history, but it's that this is the traditional way that everybody used to live their lives is by the moon phases. So with new moon, it's the setting of intentions of what do you want to accomplish, and this can be big or small. It can be like I'm going to do the same routine every day for the month, or it could be something major of like I'm going to start out on this new big goal that I've been working toward. Then you're manifesting that up until the full moon. So there's the waxing moon phase, and that's where you are putting in the work to actually manifest it. Then by the full moon, you actually have the not necessarily accomplishing it, but you're embracing the work that you've done so far. And by the waning moon, you're coming back down. It's giving you a time to rest and reflect before you start over again.
Yeah, I have this memory of, you know, talking to some people when I was living in Australia, and it was this friend of mine, Chase, and the conversation was basically around like how affected we are by phases
Mhm.
of the moon. And
Yeah.
even just putting it in the context of water, like literally
Mhm.
our physical bodies are, what is it, like 88% water or something like that, or even more.
Yeah. I think it's
And
more, but yeah,
yeah, I think it's in the 90s. I'm not, it's
I
a
don't remember
lot,
what it is, but
it's
yes.
significant. And, you know, how much obviously like the tides are completely affected by and ruled by the moon and the moon phases. And it was just this conversation where he was very much like, this is nonsense to think that we could be affected by the phases of the moon. And it's kind of
Mhm.
coming from this paradigm of imagining that humans are somehow removed from nature.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Especially as women too. It's like we have cycles of our bodies that are tied to this. Like there's so much about who we are that is embracing these cycles, and yet how could we possibly not be affected by them? That's crazy.
Right. And I mean, also, obviously, just on like a very, clear point, like we literally measure, whether you want to say that we're disconnected from it or doing our own thing apart from nature or not, like month is a moon phase, like
Yes. Yes.
this is already what we measure that by. So
Yep.
did you have any interesting experiences on either the recent like Aries new moon or full moon in Scorpio? Any kind of notable things? Because they were some pretty powerful like astrological kind of events.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't have anything that was crazy. I didn't even expose myself besides getting out of my apartment very often, um, which I need to do more of. But I think what I always notice is I get hornier and I am just like, I can't sleep. And like, those are the two things that happen. And so I think it
Yes.
was like extreme or more extreme than usual. But yes, but did you have something that happened?
Well, first of all, I love that because that just brings up, I mean, and this is obvious knowledge to a lot of people and would have been very obvious knowledge to like
Mhm.
our great great grandmothers, but like literally growing up, it was never talked about in sex ed, in anything about, like my mother passing this knowledge to me that
Mhm.
naturally the reason that we're like hornier during the full moon and that there's kind of this association with copulation with that is traditionally that's when we're ovulating. And
Yes,
and
totally.
traditionally we have our period during the new moon. And like
Right.
literally that's something that I learned, I think, while I was in Guatemala.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I didn't have not until I read a fictional book where they experienced that, and then I Googled it and it was like, holy shit, like that's crazy.
Did you read The Red Tent?
No, no, I actually it's called The Mists of Avalon.
I love
Um
that book.
yeah. So her and her experience when she's, a young priestess essentially, and how like that's when she's learning all of those things. So it was just like the goddess of the moon and everything else.
Yes, so good. And I mean, there have been times where my cycle has almost been linked up to the new moon, but
Mhm.
I feel like, between everything with how many years I was on birth control and just having like
Yeah.
no connection to any of this,
Yep.
definitely been affected. Um, yeah, I mean, for me, so do you ever I want to talk a little bit about, I guess for me, that both the new moon and the full moon have become times of doing, small ceremonies, whether making
Mhm.
altars or amulets, just things that it's funny because when I think of this has kind of been a big theme in my trip as well. Like I remember, learning about Greek mythology or like the Celts or
Mhm.
whatever, and sort of these symbolic, ritualistic, ceremonial things that they would do. And even just like the putting the coins over the eyes, like to cross the river
Yeah.
Styx or things like this, and thinking like, oh, that is so primitive and silly
Mhm.
and ridiculous, and we know better than that now. And I just feel like it's become something that plays such a special role in my life. And
Mhm.
yeah, so like what does ritual and ceremony and that kind of thing look like for you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's funny because when I first started doing this, I was doing research on pagan holidays and all these things. It was that we do rituals today, but we don't think of them as rituals. So,
Mm,
like, weddings are a ritual. It's the
yes.
traditions of putting on the dress and gathering people together, or, funerals are similar, birthdays are rituals. And yet we don't see them as this thing of honoring somebody in the same way.
Mm,
And so that was also part of why I loved all of the Sabbats, is what they call them, of pagan holidays, because it's putting intention behind something like we do with Christmas or Thanksgiving, but it's got this much deeper meaning to it. So to me, what I've always tried to do with the pagan holidays is take a day of like it is Christmas. So in the same way where you're thinking, okay, tomorrow's the day, we're going to do all of these interesting, fun things that's different than our daily lives. We're going to eat different food. We're going to honor this time. I try and do that. And it's hard when it's just, by myself and I'm not necessarily have a bunch of people around, but it's still just like I try and put intention of like, I'm gonna make a new recipe or whatever that might be. And then with the moon phases, I try and do it where the night of that phase, I take time and I meditate and I light a candle and I just give myself that space. So again, it's all these things are kind of stepping away from the day to day to just reconnect with yourself.
right. And just bring that intention of observation and honoring that.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
I've had a couple of pretty interesting, like, sacred kind of magical things happen with some like animal spirits, and I've talked about it a
Mm,
bit on my YouTube channel, but
mhm.
there's been like two different great horned owls that I've found dead on the side of the road, um
Oh, geez.
like newly dead. But realizing like, okay, this is something that I can stop and like bring devotion to, and like literally have brought them with me. And
Hmm.
the first one I literally like saved in my freezer,
Oh
um
my
like
gosh.
a few days. It was just a few days until the full moon, because I realized, I was
Oh
like, this
yeah.
is sacred, like this is magical. This can be something, mundane and disgusting, and this rotting body on the side of the road, or this can be a sacrifice made by, a temporal carnal sacrifice made by the eternal spirit of owl,
Mhm.
that I can offer in just devotion, and just that like, this sacrifice was not in vain, like I am
Mhm.
honoring your life,
Yes.
and literally the day I left for my trip, which was the day of the full moon in Scorpio. So like the next full moon, as I'm driving out of
Mhm.
town on the Powell Highway, there's another great horned there on the side
Oh
of the
my
road.
gosh.
And
That's crazy. I have never seen an owl on the side of the road before, ever.
yeah,
That's
well,
wild.
and I really think, to me, it's just, whatever you want to call it. But for me, like, this is that what shows up when we give that devotion. It's like
Mhm.
nature or these spirits or whatever it is that has made this glorious earth, is like, well, someone's paying attention.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's all we're like, so we can sort of come into communion or partnership, like with
Mhm.
whether it's the moon, which of course is one of the major arcana, and
Yep.
I actually just got my first full tarot deck, which is maybe kind of similar to yours, but it's
Oh, cool.
spirit animal totem. So
Beautiful.
you come into communion with this, and I then and it has to do with like trust. And I think
Mhm.
magic has so much to do with that, because
Yeah.
it's been squelched, and our intellectual mind wants to come in and be like, that's stupid, that doesn't matter, that's just a dead
Yeah.
owl on the side of the road, but then you get these signs of like, okay, but really, like another great horned on the next full moon. And
Yep.
then okay, so this kind of leads into something I've been thinking about that I want to get your take on, if you ever think about this.
Yeah.
So then also during my trip, and I've never, at least consciously, paid attention to have seen a dead coyote on the side of the road. And
Mhm.
so that was another thing that happened. And I found this coyote, and like I couldn't take the coyote with me. Like she was too big. So I just like laid her to rest in this place in the sage. But it was this moment where I had this little ornament of a fox, and I was like, I'm going to put that, like, fox and coyote are friends. Like, I'm going to put this fox with the coyote, like, to keep,
Mm.
in its little arms, like, to keep the coyote company. And it was in that moment where, you know, like, what did they say? Like, information is one thing, like, knowledge or knowing is another. And it was in that
Yeah.
moment that I was like, no, like, the things of like giving food to the dead or doing these like ritualistic things, like, it's real. And the
Yes.
spirits of these beings, the eternal spirits of these like mortal beings, like, see that and appreciate it.
Oh my God, yes. It's so crazy that you say this because I read this poem by Mary Oliver,
Love her.
and I maybe you've heard this one. This is crazy. She said that she had never seen a gray fox, and when she did, it was on the side of the road. And so she carried the fox and put it down, and then the next night she heard another gray fox howling for its partner. And so and then the next day it was gone, and so she carried that fox to the partner, and it was just like the most heartbreaking poem I've ever read. And just you saying all of this just brings it to mind. I just literally read it the other day, and synchronicities, man. Like,
Whoa. Okay, so
yeah,
so this goes next level. So like, first of all,
yeah,
send me that poem. I want to link
yeah,
to that,
yes, totally.
because I had no idea. So then the next day after that whole coyote thing, and that night I had had like a ceremony with juniper and had like written on this little piece of paper, like learning from Mother Juniper and Brother Coyote, and just like
Mm,
going into like that kind of place like you do when
yeah,
you're just in nature.
yeah.
And the next day I was driving like in between Cody and Billings, so this road that we've driven a million times.
Right.
And I didn't really know where I was going, but suddenly I was like, oh, like this road, like, I don't know, this road. And
Oh,
it was to Chief Plenty State Park. I didn't go all the way, but I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go this
I
way.
feel like I've seen that sign. I've never done that,
You
but
know what
yes,
I'm talking about? Well, we should
yes,
go together one day to
yes.
actually all the way, because so then and this ties in with where I'm going with this, as far as like I've started to sort of notice things where like real life events kind of link up with like tarot themes. Like, for
Mhm,
instance, the first place that I went to stay was at Five Springs Falls campground in the Bighorns. And like
mhm.
that week, Channy Nicholas, who's an astrologer, had the Five of Cups as like the tarot
Oh my
card,
God,
you know? So there
crazy.
was a road that was like five five something creek, and I was like, yeah, like, okay, I'm gonna take this road like off the Chief
Mhm,
Plenico. And I was like, whatever, like, I'm along for the ride, but five, and so I turn and I go that way, and I start getting these weird feelings, but I'm like, am I on the right path? Like, and I'm passing
mm.
through these weird, like, stone pillars in several places. I was like, am I entering a portal? Like, literally,
My
what's
God.
happening? Like, there's like meadowlarks, like, zooming in, like, seemingly like leading me. And I go to the end of the road, Jess, and I just like, I can't even breathe when I get there because I can't go any further. There's a sign that says, like, no trespassing, private property. And to the left, like on five fence posts, these people have hung the bodies of five coyotes.
You're kidding.
I'm
Oh my
not kidding.
God.
I'm not kidding. And so I was like, whoa. Like, so literally, when you commune with these animals, and
Mhm,
so I, have kind of developed these ceremonies. So I like took some sacred rocks that I had and like my frankincense and just went and like blessed all of them. And there were like
yeah.
coyote bones like scattered all on the ground. Um,
Jesus.
yeah,
What do
and
you think that meant? Was like, what do you think the message was from seeing that?
well, see, I haven't totally integrated it yet, but this is something I've been thinking of, where this is what I want to ask you about. So just
Mhm,
today, I was taking a walk with my dogs, and I was
mhm.
like, literally right before our call, and I look up and there's like it was so funny, you know, how animal, like there's this wild going on right in the middle of everything that so there's like the interstate on one side, like a huge
Mm.
fuel station here, like a FedEx, like shipping place here. But then there's this prairie in between it. And I look up and there's 8 pronghorns, like just up there. And then I look over because I hear them screaming and there's 2 sandhill cranes. And I turn around over here and
Yeah.
there's a meadowlark. And I'm like, but suddenly something clicks and I'm like, these scenes are like giving me the same messages that a tarot card would. So like, here's the 8 of
Yeah.
pronghorns, which could be like the 8 of pentacles because it's earth. And
Yes.
here's the 2 of sandhill cranes, which could be like the 2 of wands because it's air.
Yep.
And like the 8 of
Yes.
wands with the meadowlark. So I hadn't really thought of this all the way, but I mean, I guess coyotes, I would probably associate with swords and fire. That's just like
Yeah.
a thought. So
Yeah.
5 of swords is not a great card.
Which when you're talking about the death of the coyotes and the slaughter of them, I think that that does play into it to some extent of just, the symbolism of it.
Right.
It almost just makes me want to like make a deck of like Western animal like tarot. Like that just like is the
Almost.
first thing that came to mind. I'm not an artist. I couldn't draw it by any means, but it's like that just sounds like a beautiful way of representing our past, I suppose, of just, how we see the world from our for Wyoming roots and everything. But
Yes, because exactly. Well, first of all, that's happening. I don't know who we're going to
yeah,
collaborate with,
we're
but like
gonna
that's
find
happening.
somebody. Yes.
I already have someone in mind who's an amazing artist that could, well, actually, JC, JC
Oh
Myers,
yeah.
she
Yeah.
created a coloring book that was, yeah, well,
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
and here's her vibe. Like, I don't know if you've seen this, but she did my Divinity Ranch logo.
Oh hell yes. That would be
So,
amazing.
but I think that that's really, so I don't know, just something clicked for me of like these, numbers are messages,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
letters, like code. And then we all kind of have
Yep.
these, it's like, what are the relative symbols? Like, here, maybe that energy, that archetype is like represented by coyote. And
Mhm.
somewhere else in Australia, that's represented by dingo. And like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like it's also that I think the signs of obviously you're seeing these things and the repetition of them of just like what is the coyote trying to tell you? Like what are these things? Like what could you uh do with this information that's going to either, I don't know, is it bettering wildlife? Is it something to do with what you embody in yourself?
Right.
Um but I
Well,
think with you on this journey of traveling and everything, like you're going to see that so often. And I'm curious, like, how you could apply that in your travels, I suppose.
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's kind of, it's like just, you know, my thing for Divinity Ranch is like documenting real life magic, right? And
Hmm.
I just think that magic to me is synonymous with meaning.
Hmm.
And I think that's what tarot is it's just this way of finding and making meaning um within
Yep.
our lives and interpreting that narrative that's happening, all of these things, all of these inputs, and like, how is it meaningful? Like, what does it mean? Not in some big objective cerebral sense, but like,
Mhm.
what does it mean to you?
Yep. It's like we've lost so much of the magic of the daily life and the meaning that we can find in it because we've had this like puritanical magic isn't real. We're not going to do that. But like our lives would be so much more fulfilling if we think that these types of things are magical and we're paying attention to them. And
Yes.
that means that every day you can find those things that make your life more worth living,
Yes.
which I don't see why anybody wouldn't want that.
Amen. And I don't know. It's really cool that we had this conversation because somehow I hadn't like totally made that connection between like, okay, obviously, literally this is a scene of like the 5 of coyotes, like, and
Yeah.
finding that relative interpretation of that in the symbols in my world versus kind of
Mhm.
this you know, outside of time and space, like eternal thing of tarot and that
Yeah.
and that framework. So yeah, and I think it's relative to, like, it doesn't have to be animals, you know, like when you're in the city, it
Yeah.
could be something totally different.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think like if you look at most tarot decks, I've looked at quite a few, and it's like often it's people.
Right.
So, in the case of what the ones I'm drawn to and maybe you're drawn to, it's animals because that's what we speak to. But I think you can also look at it from a human perspective of just like how those things are embodied. So no matter where you are, you can find a deck that applies to how you view life in that same way.
Right. So beautiful. Well, I mean, this has been just like a phenomenal conversation as
Yes, I've
as
loved it.
always. And so I guess I'll just end maybe with start to wrap up with the question of what area of your life are you like, or for any of us or for you, where do you feel like magic is really asking to be brought and show up, and
Mm.
how are you kind of listening to that and those signs?
Yes, yes. It is a great question. Um, so I feel like my sole purpose has always been to help animals, but thus far in my life, I've made all the excuses of why not to do that. So I am preparing to dig into that right now, and I think so much of the magic in my life can be created from helping animals. So if starting in June, I'm volunteering for an animal rescue. I'm finally adopting my dog that I've been waiting on
Yeah.
for
Oh,
a
I just got
very long
goosebumps.
time. Yeah, yeah, and also taking adventures and I'm like part of it is like I'm adopting an older dog because they're harder to rehome and I just want a life, and it's like I'm gonna try and connect to as many animals as possible, and I have things in my brain of what this looks like long term of a sanctuary.
Yes.
If I could turn that into something with technology of how could I use my skill set to bring people together to help animals in a way that is profitable also for the animals. So it's like I'm finally fucking starting. Like I'm just like I'm ready to do this, and it's part of I've just been preparing for that. I feel like up until now.
Yes. And you're integrating all these sides of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It feels like the timing is right. It's coming together when it should. I'm feeling just confident about who I am now and what my direction is in life. So it feels really good.
Well, I have like buku goosebumps from everything that you just said. As but when you were like sanctuary, my body was like me.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I mean, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but obviously we share that connection of just a total love for, and you know, maybe this reciprocal kind of guardianship with animals, and
Yes.
I look
I
forward to
completely agree.
collaborating around that.
I completely agree. I had you in mind of just, I think all the connections come together of the people that can, bring this about, whether or not it's that we just help each other or, what that will look like down the road. But I think there's all kinds of opportunities.
Yes, and there are all kinds of ways to ask and receive the answers and
Yes.
trust that we're on the right path.
Yes. Agreed.
So, oh, and wait, is today a new moon also? No,
Next week,
next.
Tuesday.
Okay. Whew.
Yep.
But
Yep. Almost there.
okay, I think it's either today or tomorrow. I don't know how into astrology you are, but Venus is coming into Gemini, I think.
Oh, I did not know that.
So, look into it.
Exciting, exciting. I did do my birth chart. So I'm reading my birth chart. Actually, Layla gave me my birth chart. So
Ooh.
um it's like a long ass document. So I have to but I'm learning a lot about myself with that. So I'm getting into it more.
Well, maybe we can dive more into that during our next conversation.
That sounds lovely. I would love it.
Well, thank you so much, Jess. It's been amazing, and you are just a light in my life and unto the world.
Oh, same to you, Virginia. I'm so happy we got to chat.
You too. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All the while I was teaching in the state of Virginia, I wanted to see Gray Fox. Finally, I found him. He was in the highway. He was singing his death song. I picked him up and carried him into a field while the cars kept coming. He showed me how he could ripple, how he could bleed. Goodbye, I said to the light of his eye as the cars went by. 2 mornings later, I found the other. She was in the highway. She was singing her death song. I picked her up and carried her into the field where she rippled, half of her gray, half of her red, while the cars kept coming, while the cars kept coming. Gray fox and gray fox, red, red, red.
What's the name of that poem?
Red.